The sound of djembe drum started as a low tremble and grew more distinct as the musicians drew closer to the hundreds gathered inside the Memphis church. "We love you, Tyre," the drummers chanted, referring to Tyre Nichols, a black man whose beating by 5 police officers led to his death, and this funeral on the first day of Black History Month, which I guess makes it a little bit worse. By the time the procession reached his black casket, draped in large white bouquet, the congregation in the Mississippi Bouquet Christian Church was on its feet, shouting the chant in unison. Some raised clenched fists, others let out screams of grief. Many grabbed tissues to dab at tears. All of this was streamed on live television. Now, this funeral that was filmed on Wednesday had all the hallmarks of what's known as a homegoing service in the black community. With the gospel hymns and the remembrances from loved ones and a stirring eulogy from a clergyman. But in addition to the offering was an outlet for a private mourning of Nichols' family and friends. This ritual was also public and political. It was a venue to air the shared grief of African American people, or ADOS as we like to call each other, and to once again call for leaders to address an epidemic of police violence that this time might be different. Rev, I want to play Al Sharpton from the homegoing service because I feel like what Al Sharpton said, regardless how you feel about it, I feel like what he had to say was on some level important. Come on now. Here we go. Why is this muted? No, this thing is muted. Hold on. Okay.
That makes me come
Here we go.
to the...
Let me start from the beginning.
So it was my growing up in the King movement in the North after his death that makes me come to the Lorraine Hotel and look at the spot that Dr. King died. This morning, I took my youngest daughter, Ashley, with me. And in all of the ice, I told the story of how Dr. King had came to Memphis to fight for garbage workers, city employees that had no safety. So it was 2 had been killed with a malfunction. Growing up in the King movement, and here in the North after his death, Ashley, 55 years later, makes me come to the Lorraine, looking at the balcony where Martin Luther King shed his blood for city workers, for black city workers, to be able to work in the police department, work in sanitation. And the reason why, Mr. and Mrs. Wells, what happened to Tyre is so personal to me is that 5 black men that wouldn't have had a job in the police department would not ever be thought of to be in an elite squad. In the city that Dr. King lost his life, not far away from that balcony, you beat a brother to death. There's nothing more insulting and offensive to those of us that fight to open doors, that you walk through those doors and act like the folks we had to fight for to get you through them doors. You didn't get on the police department by yourself. The police chief didn't get there by herself. People had to march and go to jail, and some lost their lives to open the doors for you. And how dare you act like that sacrifice was not for nothing? You ain't in no New England state, you in Tennessee. where we had to fight for you. And you take that position?
Yeah, so that was Al Sharpton talking about the officers and of that situation. One thing I will say that he did make a really good point about was that there was a concerted effort to put black officers on the police department with the idea that if there were black people on the in the police department, that a lot of this stuff would be subverted.
Right.
So what the fact that it hasn't says, and you know, I've talked multiple times about my own personal situation when I was beat up by a police officer who was black. Like a lot of this is just stuff is systemic, that it's not necessarily just the people who are the color of the people who are doing the policing, that there is an issue with policing and how the black community is policed in itself. And so I'm actually glad that I'm not going to say I'm glad this happened, but I am glad that this has finally been exposed, or at least on a large scale. You know, anybody who loves hip hop as much as I do knows loves Ice Cube back in the day talking about black police showing out for the white cops. And if you remember Boys in the Hood, the great John Singleton movie, the black cop was the most racist in the whole movie against other black people. He hated black people more than all the white people did. The white dude wasn't even anywhere near as bad as the brother was. And so that happens sometimes. And so, you know, I am glad that Al Sharpton sort of said that out loud, Rev. But did you watch the memorial or?
No, I was working.
Yeah, I saw clips of it.
I'm like you. I saw clips and, you know.
Yeah.
Oh, thank God for YouTube, I guess.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That YouTube and Twitter,
right?
But a lot of this stuff is I'm honest to say, it's tiring, isn't it? Like I'm a little bit fatigued about stuff like this, and I know we have to talk about it. We're in a predominantly black city. We are black men. This is a predominantly black city, and so. To not talk about policing, especially like I said, some of the experiences I've had, experiences my other people in my family have, it's almost unavoidable. But still, don't you feel a certain level of fatigue from talking about police brutality?
Well, you know, I get a certain fatigue talking about any of the things that happen in the world by which we provide the daily evidence that this isn't heaven, we're not perfected, and we need help. I get tired of talking about it, but I don't get tired of dealing with it because that's my job, is to deal, to expose sin and offer the alternative to sin, the alternative of righteousness, the alternative of love, the alternative of the peace of God, which is in short supply.
Right.
But the thing about it is, you can sit around and talk about it all day long. I was talking with a colleague yesterday who is in Illinois. He's a Lutheran pastor in the Northern Illinois district, and he's doing a lot of stuff in North Chicago.
Right.
A lot of stuff with schools in the area, a lot of stuff in the community out there. And so when somebody comes up to him and he said this, he goes, when a white guy comes up to me saying Black Lives Matter, I always ask him, well, okay, so what are you doing about it? You know, anybody can type some characters on a Twitter thing.
Yes, they do.
You know, that does nothing.
Right.
When young ADOS boys and girls are struggling to get a quality education because the resources that are provided by the city are insufficient, and because the parents are too busy chasing a dollar, trying to keep up with the YouTube celebrities, to be focused on the things that matter for their children. When teachers and their unions are more concerned about protecting themselves and their turf than they are about the children that they are there 5 days a week, supposedly because they're called to that, rather than because it's a safe paycheck. Those things.
Right.
And he's doing things about that. So you can hashtag Black Lives Matter, or you can act like Black Lives Matter by working on the things that make our lives precarious.
I agree with you there, Rev. One of the things that I've learned working with the nonprofit, I work with United Urban Network Incorporated. Look us up, folks. We've been here for 20 years. And this is the frustrating thing, okay? You know, this is one of the things, you know, specifically I love about my mother, right? Because my mother is somebody, and this has been very, on some levels, frustrating for me. My mother seems to be a person with infinite patience for other human beings, especially those who don't have any desire to be part of the solution, okay? Now, when I say that, like you talk about people who are doing things, right? There's been so many events that we've done in this city and around Northwest Indiana where we have invited the clergy, the media, politicians, and the community itself. People from our community seem to be the people who least likely oftentimes want to improve their own situation. And that is the frustrating part. A lot of times it's people or it's people who let whatever petty political or petty personal beefs get in the way, and you go, look, people are dying, people are starving, people are hungry, people are doing A, B, C, and D, they are suffering. You can't put whatever feeling aside that you have for 5 minutes to help deal with this issue, whether it's for the battered women and homeless children at this, or for the veterans, or for people who are dying from gun violence in the city of Gary in Northwest Indiana. And the answer seems to be no. The people who most need help a lot of times and stuff like Stop the Violence are the people who are the hardest to reach. And that is something that has frustrated me to no end. There's been a lot of times where you go, well, what's the point? You know, I'm sure, like, and I always wanted to ask some. Well, I guess I should ask you because you're part of the clergy. Like, do you ever just go, what's the point when you're dealing with communities like ours? And I mean, I'm sure Tyre's community in Memphis is very similar. All our communities are very similar. At some point, what is the point? Because people are not going to, like, wake up and snap out of it.
There have been days I have said, what if we just plowed the whole thing under and started over? Because clearly the foundation upon which this city was laid is so messed up,
right,
that all we're doing now is playing around the edges. While the ship sinks.
Right.
It does feel that way sometimes.
Yes, it does.
The one thing that keeps me going is the idea that at the end of the day, communities are not made up of just of corporations and politicians and business interests. They're made up of people, families.
Right.
And if U.S. Steel were to pack up tomorrow because they developed some sort of technology that enabled them to do everything that they like to do and walk away from Gary, they'd just be done with us, wouldn't have to worry about the EPA and Lake Michigan, wouldn't have to worry about the bickering back and forth with the city of Gary over what they owe us since they put us here. You know, they just packed up and left.
Yeah.
The people who live here would find a way to make it work.
Right.
They found a way to make it work when they were all packed like sardines into that one section of town. They found a way to make it work when they were told you can only go to this school. All of y'all just go to this school. Don't worry about the other schools. You going to this school. Found a way to make that work. To the point where now people say that, that school is an icon, is a treasure. Think about that for a moment. Right. The school that we were forced to be in is now a hallowed treasure.
Look,
we made it work.
Let's not upset the Roosevelt people here now.
But it's the truth.
We work for Roosevelt people. I have no problems with Roosevelt whatsoever.
Me neither. In fact, I'll be the first to tell you was it 2017? I believe it was. They were having a drill meet. Right. I can remember when the citywide ROTC meet was right there with the basketball sectionals.
Right.
Well, those days are a long time ago, but I was there, and it's funny. You walk into that building, and you could feel the weight of history there. There was just a certain aura in that building I never felt in Horace Mann, at Wirt, at Lew Wallace, at West Side. There's something about Roosevelt.
Yeah, look, I agree. Like I said, the history of Roosevelt, even with people like the Jacksons and Glenn Big Dog Robinson, and we definitely have a lot of history at that school. So like I said, Roosevelt people do not call in. We are not dissing Roosevelt in the slightest. Now, here's one thing that sort of annoyed me from Tyre Nichols' funeral or homegoing service or whatever we're calling it nowadays. This sort of got on my nerves, and if you listen to the show regularly, you probably are not surprised by what got on my nerves from this situation.
When their babies are born, pray to God, when they hold that child, that body and that life will be safe for the rest of his life. Yet we have a mother and a father who mourn the life of a young man who should be here today. This is a family that lost their son and their brother through an act of violence at the hands and the feet of people who had been charged with keeping them safe. This violent act was not in pursuit of public safety. It was not in the interest of keeping the public safe, because one must ask, was not it in the interest of keeping the public safe that Tyre Nichols would be with us here today? I was, as a senator, as a United States Senator, a co-author of the original George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And as Vice President of the United States, we demand that Congress pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Joe Biden will sign it. And we should not delay, and we will not be denied. It is non-negotiable.
Now, see, this is why this, like, really, I'm trying to use radio-friendly language, but this is why this makes me mad, okay? This is how the Democrats trap black people, okay? This is how they've continually trapped us for the last 50 or 60 years now, okay? Now, first of all, they send Kamala Harris, right, to this. And this is why we're not serious politically as a community, as the black community. First of all, you have Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, two of the people most responsible for the prison industrial complex that we have in this country. Okay, people who have been hawkish on police, cracking down on people. Joe Biden voted throughout the 90s, look from the Clinton crime bill to everything else he did. He's one of the people who empowered, put more of these people on the streets, more cops on the streets, and with a lot more artillery and a lot more with a vengeance, and giving them more impunity over the years. Just look at Joe Biden's history as a lock him up, beat him up, whatever it takes type of politician. And so now he sends his vice president, who was the attorney general in California, who helped keep black people in prison after they were supposed to be out of prison. These people who were supposed to have served their sentence, they were kept in prison longer because California needed the slave labor. And this is who we, once again, let get in our black churches and be humming and hawing and these people do our community so wrong. You one of the main people who did our community wrong, Kamala Harris. You one of the main people who are responsible for the police operating with impunity. Seriously.
She got paid.
Yes, she did.
Took her paycheck.
Yes, she has. And another thing she talked about, which really got on my nerves, was this whole we have to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Now, we've covered this the whole way because me and you were covering the entire 2020 presidential election cycle, okay? Joe Biden, before he got elected, said, I'm going to have a police oversight committee. That's what he said, okay? And then the George Floyd thing happened. He said, we're going to have the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act, okay? As soon as he got in office, within about, I think it was the first month or the second month he was in office, he disbanded the police oversight committee. Completely disbanded it and said, we are going to focus on passing the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. Now that's okay, that sounds reasonable. It's not reasonable because he knew that unless he was going to abolish the filibuster, he would need 60 votes in Congress in order to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So he essentially disbanded the police oversight committee, knowing that there was no way in hell that with the Democrats only having 51 votes in the Senate, that they would ever get the 60 votes necessary to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. He knew this. He knew this. She knows this. Everybody knows this. That they would have to, again, abolish or drastically alter the filibuster in order to pass the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. So essentially, they and the Democrats are great at doing this, and black people are great at falling for it. They put up some sacrificial legislation that they knew would not pass in 100 years to just appease black people so they could, in situations like this, so they can go to black churches and hum and haw and, oh, we gonna do this and we gonna do that, so that, you know, so that we could pass this legislation. The Republicans now have the House. So we're never getting the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. We're not, and she knows this. So why do they keep saying this? Other than to, once again, essentially lie black people into continuing to vote for these people.
You know what? To me, there's something even more basic than that. Because it ignores an essential truth of government. There's an old saying, all politics is local.
Right.
Policing in the United States is a local issue. You could have in this community a highly efficient, effective, professional police force, or you can have a bunch of yokels running around, you know, bullies with a badge. But if there are problems with this police department here in Gary, the solution to those problems is right here in Gary, Indiana.
Yep.
There is nothing that we need from Washington, D.C. Washington, D.C. is not involved in our hiring practices, in our training, in our recruitment, in how we mentor and monitor and keep track of our officers once they've completed their initial training. If we want our police department to operate according to certain parameters and not according to others, if we want them to represent a particular philosophy and not another one, we can solve that right here.
But we could get rid of qualified immunity and things like that. We can do stuff like that on a large scale.
Yeah, we don't need Washington's permission to do that.
Let me get this caller really quick because they've been on the line for a while. Hello, caller.
Good evening. How you doing, Pastor?
Hello.
I just want to make a small point.
Wait a minute. You said hello to me.
Mm-hmm.
You see this big guy across? There's this big guy.
Hey, don't worry about me, brother. We're good.
I will give you my humblest apologies.
It's all good, brother. It's all good.
He's bigger than me.
Working Fridays, and I just happened to be off this Friday for a change, and I was listening to your program. So I know the pastor's there, but I don't know who the other gentleman is there. So
I'm Scott Cannon. I've been here the whole time.
Yeah.
That's okay. Yeah.
Well, good evening, Mr. Cannon. How you doing?
It's all good, brother. So what's on your mind this Friday night?
This may shock you, but I agree with you. We get the song and dance, but we get the song and dance to a worse degree than you may think.
Mm.
The George Floyd act is really not needed.
Mm.
There's an act already there that is going. Do you remember Chris Rock when he was in the head of state?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
That's where he says, "But no, we don't need more laws. We need you to enforce the laws that are already there."
Mm-hmm.
Well, they need to enforce the laws already there. There's a law there called the Graham v. Connor Act, and if you go deep into it, it guidelines exactly what the police can and cannot do and should do in situations to include that they're supposed to de-escalate based upon the amount of force they are facing. Mm. It includes in the act also that they cannot use deadly force unless they're facing deadly force. Mm. If they apply current law to the situation in Memphis, those police officers are blatantly guilty.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Because basically the law says that, okay, if you have, and this was in the law now, when people remember this, if you have 2-on-1 or 3-on-1, there's no need for you to pull your taser or a pepper spray the person because you got numbers on the person.
Right.
So if you are properly trained, and properly using your tactics, police officers, which is in hand-to-hand combat, the whole 9 yards, why would you need to pull a taser, pull out your nightsticks, or pepper spray somebody with 3-on-1 or 4-on-1?
Right.
And I guarantee you that kick to the face that you saw in there, that is against the law, but that's already standing. Mm. That hit after you had him handcuffed and beating him after you had him handcuffed, that is in the law because that's not de-escalation of force. There was no reason for that.
Right.
So you need to enforce the laws that you already have.
Right. Well, that's always true on some level. And I remember after January 6th, that was a big part of the discourse too. Like, we already have laws against all this stuff. But, Washington, and that's I'm glad you brought this up because this is a big part of the way that, like you said, Washington sort of, and I think both parties do this, gaslight people into voting for them, is by saying, well, we're going to pass this big thing, this big overreaching law that benefits everybody. And then you go, wait, isn't there already laws on the books against all this stuff? Like, why aren't anybody just enforcing what we already got?
Already there.
Right. Well, thank you for your call, brother.
Thank you. Take care. Have a good night.
You too. Yeah, we got to go to a break. It is 6:40. Oh, my God. This show is already going by so quickly. Please stay with us here on WLTH 1370 AM. I am Scott Cannon. Over there is the Rev. And we'll be right back after this.
You are listening to Scott and the Rev on WLTH 1370 AM. Give us a call, 219-885-1371.